young people are turning their back on marriage at a cyclic rate. In particular, men. Do they have a point? I keep being told that Jesus is some kind of liberal or that the modern Christians don't view Jesus the same way as he's portrayed actually in the Bible. We're going to go ahead and discuss that. And Brian breaks down Matthew 28 and what it has to do with the divine council worldview. So keep it right here because that's what's coming up on Mount Hermeneutics. You're listening to Mount Hermeneutics, where three Marines give their perspective on God, faith, and spirituality with a heavy lean on the divine council worldview. This is not your grandma's Sunday school, nor is it always for the Christian faint of heart. Nothing about who we are or what we say make us experts, but you better believe we'll have a take, and perhaps it won't suck. I'm here for diversity purposes, maybe.
Dre's our diversity hire. We had to check that box.
Non-Trinitarian, not because I'm a Negro. So
shut your filthy holes.
It was like soft R slavery versus hard R slavery.
They didn't. Oh yeah.
Fellas, what's happening? I'm Andre Bibbs, and you can reach me of my namesake in Facebook and Instagram. My DMs are open there. Hit me up. And I'm joined by my two lifelong friends. Matthew, what's up?
Hey, what's going on, everybody? Let's see, which is the best social to reach me at? Probably my Facebook. So it's Matt Moore on Facebook. I'll throw a link to that. That'll be down in the belows. I'll probably start trying to develop my X handle a little bit more. That might be an easier way for us to communicate. So maybe that'll be an easy way to break this into the show because it's a little more wide open. But yeah. Hey, Brian, what's new with you, man?
Hey, guys. Yeah, I'm Brian. Thanks for, I almost said tuning in, but that's a TV phrase or a radio phrase, and they're not doing that.
But we're old.
Sure.
So,
Yeah, well, I'm not. But, I didn't know we were doing the interpersonal social thing, but I like my privacy. I'm just Brian.
Then don't, right?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, so if Brian's not going to Brian, if you don't want to give out your socials, your direct socials, I mean, people can reach you through the show, right? Like they can comment on our direct channels to the Facebook channel or the group or the YouTube channel directly, and we can
or my blog, thirdhelix.com.
There you go.
Which has my personal address, so kind of defeats the purpose, but that's okay. That's all right. All right. Yeah. How are you guys doing?
Man, we're doing okay now. Kind of we're a little nervous about being sick. Both of my kids, so my daughter she had COVID last week, and then we thought my son had it also, and then he was feeling sick again on Friday, and he just tested positive. So we're a little stressed because we've got to travel to Orlando for the finals for that Miss Veteran America competition that Carrie's competing in. So she'll be competing Saturday, Sunday of next weekend. So we'll have to adjust our recording, but that's just for the three of us. It won't affect the listeners. But yeah, so we're just crossing our fingers that she doesn't come up, sick right before we had to board a flight.
Well, I was over at your house on Wednesday, and
you were?
I didn't catch anything.
Well, that's good. I'm glad.
I'm way less healthy than all of you, so I definitely would have caught something.
Well, I'm glad you haven't yet. I hope you don't.
Thanks.
Yeah.
All right. So we'll give you all the socials at the end of the show where you can reach us through the show notes. And remember to share the show with your friends, hit like, subscribe, all that jazz. And here we go. So our first topic is marriage. And what we've noticed probably over the last few years, especially if you're into the the podcast space with the conservatives that talk about marriage a lot, we see that we kind of already get into people that are left leaning lately on TikTok and things of that nature, that they go ahead and kind of poo poo marriage. lots of divorcees, lots of trends where people stay single, or they get married but they don't have kids. But kind of a new thing that's happening right now is that in the conservative space, a lot of red pilled young people that are in the podcast slash influencer space are also talking about not being married. So I think last week, Pearl Davis, to just throw out a name, she has her little, with just pearly things, and she put some stats out about marriage, and the Daily Wire whole crew went in on her, which probably boosts her a little bit, because here, I mean, the way she put it is, hey, I've been watching these guys since I was in high school, and now they're actually attacking me on Twitter. So that's great. I can actually debate the people that I've been listening to debate for so long. She's not the only one.
What did she say? Did she say something specifically, or
yeah, her specific thing is that men shouldn't get married because it's not a good deal. It's not a good deal for men. The system is set up against men. The system with divorce and money, and basically where the system is incentivizing women to get divorced. So
because of like childcare laws and alimony and
yes,
all those kind of things.
All that.
So I didn't see the video. Was she saying they shouldn't, or she just says, I don't know why they do? Or was it kind of both?
Kind of both.
Okay.
Well, or she was saying, I do know why they do, and it's the system, and we need to change those judicial laws. I think her feeling about it is that the system is rigged, and these conservatives, these tradcons, these traditional conservatives that are into marriage, with the amount of influence that they have, that they should work harder to change these judicial things instead of just, as she would say, push marriage on young people.
So she's saying that, I mean, I'm just trying to so she's saying, hey, the right is kind of supposedly the champion of marriage.
Yes.
And yet the system is designed in such a way that greatly favors the woman. And if they, the tradcons, as you put it, want to see marriage continue, then it's up to the right to basically overhaul or adjust the legal system such that it has more of a balanced impact to both sides of the equation. Is that kind of
I think that's what she's saying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I recognize it's not what you're saying. You're just reporting it. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, and then she goes on and like, hey, perhaps Matt Walsh, Ben Shapiro, and Michael Knowles don't know what they're talking about. One, because they actually haven't hit the age where most men get divorced,
and they're all not divorced, right?
Right. And two, divorce is a lot easier on rich people. So
pay to play.
So here they attacking her, saying, well, you're not even married. You're in your early 20s or mid 20s, however old she is, and you're telling us about marriage when you're not married. But really, it's just her talking about, this is what I'm seeing when I talk to the men who come out on the other side. Mm-hmm. And another big quote she talks about is his suicide rates. So the average man who's a factory worker or a blue collar guy who kind of sets up his entire pension, his whole life based on his family and taking care of them, gets divorced, loses half his stuff, never gets to see his kids, and the suicide rate for that guy is a lot higher than it is for everyone else who commits suicide. And being that we have this suicide and anxiety problem that we have, then why are we pushing these men to get married when, as Pearl would say, she doesn't even think women should vote, right? So she's like, women are trash. Men shouldn't have to get into some kind of commercial contract, because if you were in a deal that would say, hey, you're gonna 75% be either miserable,
or you're going to be financially ruined, depressed, or kill yourself.
Yeah. Why would you enter those
dice? Yeah. I mean, she makes a pretty strong argument at least at the first pass, right?
Yeah, for sure. Like, and once I got past the
The shock factor.
Well, not necessarily that, just even because I first heard it on the TradCon side, right? They're
Okay.
like, hey, Pearl Davis said these things. And I'm like, okay. And then, you know, I read the Twitter, I'm like seeing the attacks, and then I watched probably 30 minutes of her video. I didn't watch the whole thing, but I'm like, yeah, maybe one of you should get her on the show, Candace. Right. So and she even cited Steven Crowder, who, despite no charges, no kind of filing, his divorce went public, and people saw him as an abuser due to a video that was released from his ring. Um, Even though the Daily Wire never covered that or covered the divorce, Candace Owens in particular did mention it because they had a little beef, and you know things were mentioned, and then she mentioned Crowder and his divorce. Which is, I mean, did he abuse her? I don't know, right? But
Right.
there seems to be a trend that if there's some kind of reporting,
like the Russell Brand thing going on right now. Yeah.
exactly like the Russell Brand thing.
Yeah.
Why
Yeah. I
should
mean,
we get married?
it's tough, right? Because I mean, there's there's the obvious reasons for it, right? I'll say this, I'll say it, and we can talk about it. But the purpose for marriage is to have a family, right? It's to have children. It's to reproduce. It's to continue the human race. It's both, physiological or science, right? Like the requirement to procreate, but it's also biblical in a sense of it kind of ties into God's orders of Adam and his children to go, or Moses after the flood. I forget when it was, and I'm sure Ryan. Noah. Okay, thanks. Yeah, I said Moses in the flood, didn't I? Noah in the flood, but it was
after the flood, though.
He was after Noah. Yeah. But it's to go out and populate and reproduce.
That's what I'm here for.
So, that's kind of an obvious. But then there's also a lot of stats, and I think I've actually heard Pearl mention these stats, like single parents, right? There's the statistic is, and I'm going to butcher it, and we don't have a Jamie to pull it up in real time for us, but it was like single mothers and the likelihood of their boys ending up in prison, and it was really high. It was north of 50%, right? Like I want to say it was like 60 something percent.
Yeah, it's a stat that is put out there by all kinds of people from all kinds of angles,
right? Sure. And then if the father is involved, it doesn't have to be married, but he has to be an involved parent, then that number drops drastically. But then oddly, and at this point of that stat's not relevant to this conversation, but if single fathers, the statistic is the same as if they were married and together, right?
And so the figure I'm finding, I'm your Jamie right now, since
cool.
I'm not
Thanks,
contributing
Jamie.
much so far, but 70 to 80% is the claim going around. But most of I Googled it, which is probably a mistake. A lot of the headlines are dad refutes claim kids raised by single mothers end up, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But anyway, those
but it was a really high number.
It's a high number.
It was shockingly high, right? And then that number drops down precipitously down if the father's involved. And the point of that, when I was hearing those studies, was the way it was being presented was it's all about the need for masculine involvement and for children to be raised in that kind of an environment. But really what it comes down to is it's that nuclear family, and that it's pretty hard to argue that kids stand a better chance of having a good childhood if they have both parents involved. Like it's like, I'm not getting into whether it should be just the dad, just the mom, or two moms, two dads. The point is it takes more than one person. And I actually just watched some other I was watching I forget the woman's name. I need to hit the button so I can remember her name, but she's been popping up in my feeds a lot, and she's given like TED Talks. She's sitting in a chair, and she basically explains the same thing, that women weren't designed to raise children by themselves. Like if you go back to Paleolithic times, hunter-gatherers and whatnot, like one person can't raise a kid. It takes someone's off doing something, somebody's got to be watching the kids and taking care of them. So, without making this a biblical thing, I don't think it's really hard to argue the sociological requirements of having parents raise kids. And that's the point of a marriage. Like, otherwise, what's the point? Because for two people to cohabitate, you don't need laws, you don't need protections, you don't need legal structures, you don't need anything. You just need people hanging out. Like, you don't need laws for you to have a roommate, right? And just to share the rent and share the electric bill and take turns buying groceries. It's about children, and it's about, generational continuance. I don't know what else to say about that, but to me, it's like wildly self-evident.
I go ahead, Brian,
sorry,
please.
go ahead, Dre.
No, please go ahead.
Well, I was thinking about this. It was on a complete. It wasn't even related to the Pearl stuff or the Daily Wire's response to her, but I was thinking about fruit. Like, fruit tastes good. It's also very nutritious for you, but it has its taste as an incentive to for us to eat it and we've cultivated over the centuries to make it taste good so that we enjoy eating it, and then we get the nutrition. But in the past 100 years, we have, with candy, we kind of strip the pleasant out from everything good, and we concentrate
synthesize it somewhere else.
Synthesize it, and we ramp it up so that it overloads our pleasure system, and we kind of divorce that from the nutrition. And we've kind of done that with everything. We've created this artificial version of fruit in the form of candy, and we kind of do that with all of our food, but also all of our pursuits in life.
That's a solid analogy, dude. I like that.
And we've done the same thing with sex. We treat it the same way, so that as a culture, post-sexual revolution, we don't even think of it in those terms. We think of sex as a private, personal matter, and it's really not. The act itself, of course, it's private, personal, and intimate, but the social ramifications are not. And that's why marriage has existed historically. Every single social problem that we have, directly or indirectly, can be traced back to our distorted views on sex and divorcing it, no pun intended, from marriage. Just like you were saying, crime rates go up with high out of wedlock birth rates, poverty, strains on social systems, drug addiction, taxation to cover those, to meet the demands of those strained social systems, to get to they have to feed kids breakfast now at school to make up for the lack of it at home. We're kind of looking to government more and more to fill the gap that not just with the sustenance of the child, but with teaching them values. All of this is because of our views of sex are completely distorted post-sexual revolution. So
I don't disagree with you broadly with what you just said, but is it really that simple to say it's because of the sexual revolution? I mean, I remember on this show a few episodes back, you were talking about Asherah poles and big phalluses all over the Middle East. I mean, and I'm only pointing that out to say that there's been some type of sexual revolution that's been ongoing, right? It's not like we can go back to the 60s and go, aha, it was right there. Well, that's when mankind fell over, like the Romans, right?
Yeah,
having orgies and whatnot. Like,
I wouldn't reduce it to that, but the sexual revolution itself was greatly helped along by the advent of the automobile. And also
or we could go back to what Pearl said. It's because of the 19th Amendment. I mean, joking, but not. I mean, the idea of the equal rights movement, the bra burning, women wanting to go to work, all of those kinds of things, right? Like those were all hand in glove.
Interesting you bring that up, because when you look at like the top reasons why young men don't even want to get married, one of the top ones is women's independence and gender equality. So basically, men are saying, hey, they don't really need me. She's doing her thing over there. Why do we need to get married? And I think that that ties into hookup culture, because the number one reason that popped up on this one survey that I looked was, I don't need paperwork to affirm that I'm in a relationship. Right. So,
but is that feels like a cop out, right? That answer
in
right there.
In my mind, it does, because I don't think that it's necessarily the system of divorce that is the problem with marriage. I think that it's before that. I think it's getting married and people not understanding or wanting to realize what is actually at stake. I think that we have trouble committing to everything. We don't commit to. I think we live in a disposable world, right? We use paper plates, we use a microwave, we have a disposable food, everything. If I don't like something, even our cars, even though they're $30,000, they're really disposable after 200,000 miles, right? Even before, right?
Yeah.
That's if you're a mechanic and you're good, right? So, we live in this disposable society where we confuse, I don't know.
I think if I understand what you're saying, we bring the wrong set of expectations into marriage when we do get married.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for sure.
Mm-hmm. And it seems to be generationally getting worse.
Yeah,
because I know, like, if we think back, so for those that are just listening, can't see how old we are. We're all in our mid to late 40s, right? So we're square in Gen X. And if you think about, the boomer generation, they were taught, nothing's disposable, right? Because their parents were all from the Great Depression era. And so just the way they thought about things was different. And they had expectations that marriage was going to be hard. Like I've seen and read a lot of the documentation and, talked to handful of people from, generation above me, us, that, they didn't go into marriage expecting it to be perfect. And there was a lot of expectation that they were going to struggle and they were going to fight and they were going to bicker and then it was going to be work. And I definitely see in the younger generation now with my kids, at least specifically, and Dre, I'm sure you see some of the same, that they get into these relationships and they're just like, what do you mean this isn't perfect and easy? Like, I'm out, right? They're just tapping out left, right, and center. It's kind of like, I kind of blame Seinfeld, right? You guys remember the old Seinfeld? Like, he broke up with the chick for any reason, right? She had man hands, or she was a low talker, or, the bad lighting girl, or are they real or not? Like all of those different reasons, right? That he would break up with somebody. And I feel like that is really heavy in our, and it's almost like it drives or gives them the out or the excuse for the out, right? Like
like I was saying, the advent of the automobile is a big part of that. It encourages people to spread out. It makes the world a larger place for us. And so we feel like we have infinite options. So, I mean, if you're not
confined to your neighborhood or your township kind of thing, you can.
Right. Yeah. And so much so that we don't even know our neighbors anymore.
Harry Ford's catching strays for no reason tonight.
So is it paralysis by analysis? Just like, if I'm gonna go down to this corner store, there's two options for bread, right? I need some bread from a pantry. I'm gonna get those two options. But if I go to Costco, I'm like,
there's an entire aisle of bread.
So,
yeah,
I think,
right.
But there's also a thing that happens. Like we're so saturated with movies and television and stories, and everybody is always beautiful. Men and women, and we identify with the protagonist. We see ourselves in those shoes, and for the same reason, like every guy thinks he can fight, because like every protagonist in a TV show or an action show can fight, and that's why he's the hero. And we kind of psychologically identify with that. We always think we can get the most beautiful girl there. We always think that we always I think we kind of inflate our sexual our value in the sexual marketplace. And so people just kind of they come into it with with unrealistic expectations.
Well, and I think that has to do with the hookup culture at large. I mean, people are dating, but they're not dating with intention.
Mm-hmm.
There's no, I mean, they're quick to say, "Hey, I don't want to get in a relationship. I don't want to be in this," and then they have a cop out each time. Or there's
Mm-hmm.
two people that are dating aren't on the same page when it comes to that. And I
Yeah.
think that if you're out there only to hook up, then marriage is not going to be front on your mind because you've got more to do. I think that young men today too also have this delay of the dream, right? I'm in my 20s, I have these things that I want to accomplish. And if I am to fill this whatever gender role that I'm going to have as the masculine in the marriage, I need to have this much money, I need to have this type of house, I need to have this kind of worth before I'm ready to get into that pool and add this onto my life. And I think that is a mistake that we're going down, where we need to set ourselves in a place before we get married. And I think
Yeah.
what that leads to is that the marriage becomes the capstone of your life instead of the foundation of your life.
That's a great, I think that's a great way to put it. I think,
So, I mean, if you didn't need her before, you don't need her now. And, of course, I can, talk about my own marriage where I've been with this lady for 29 years, right? And a lot of people, they talk about, money, and I made this money, and when I don't want to give half of it to you. Well, I had no money when I met her, right? And she used her young youth to follow me around because I was a US Marine. So she lost lots of opportunities to become whatever that is. And she was fine with that because we had an established set of values that we discussed beforehand.
yeah,
Even to the fact, even to the point that when we had children, she did work, but then, I mean, that's how we saw each other. That was our date. We had one car. I would drive her to work, and Matt knows how far Red Lobster is from NSA, right? So we would make that drive. That'd be kind of our time together. Then I'd pick her up, and then we'd go to bed, and I have to get up and for my next shift. Um, it was kind of cool because being in the job that I had, I couldn't really talk about work. I could talk about individuals, I could talk about personalities, I could talk about, but I couldn't talk about what I did. But so it was kind of fun to just kind of have something that we related to. I think that we have a lot of issues with uh, thinking that interests and values are the same thing, right?
mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
like
Mm-hmm.
a lot of times, like, oh yeah, I met this guy, he's into fitness, he likes to hike, he loves country music just like me, and we're gonna live together because he always wanted to travel to Paris, right? Like those are, but what does he think about trust and respect and affection
Right.
and
And
care
monogamy
and
and
guidance and reverence? These
Yeah.
are these are all the things, and maybe you really do have all those same values, but they're racked and stacked in different spots. So your arguments are going to have different weight when you have them. I I'll just say again what has worked for us. I'm like, we've over the years have created mutual interests, and to this day, a lot of things that we had interest in when we met are still not aligned, right? Like, I know that she has no interest in watching the Lakers play on a Tuesday night, right? Just like I have no interest in walking into my personal hell called, Home Goods or Hobby Lobby. But if I scored tickets and I said, "Hey, would you attend the Laker game with me?" She would make it a night and make it
Yeah.
about me and come to
Yeah.
see it. And if we're on vacation at some beach somewhere and she wants to walk into every single gift shop that's on the strip, I'm walking in there out of respect for her. I might complain, but just a little.
I only throw a fit when we have to go back to the stores we've already been in. When she's like, I want to go back to that one, I'm like, no. We already went in that store. That way, not back the way we came.
So, but there's things that we develop. We have different movie tastes, but we also have the same movie taste together. We have
Yeah.
we have different food tastes, but when we go out together, we've created
Yeah.
this thing in this bond.
And I think that's, so Carrie and I have been together 25 years, almost 26. So we're right behind you. And I think that part of what you said is what's important. I think a lot of that's what's lost on younger people, is it's embracing the differences and then finding common ground, right? You don't have to like all the same stuff. Like I know Carrie and I have had this conversation where she's always like, I want to find something for us to do together. Cause she's like, you do those things and I do these things. And I feel like we're, strangers in the night, ships passing in the night, whatever. But then there's been a couple of things that she's into. And I'm like, hey, I want to come with you. And she's like, no, you weren't invited. Like, this is my thing. Right.
That's right.
But similarly, right. Like, by the way, share the same, the same lack of enthusiasm about Home Goods or Hobby Lobby. But I can tell you, like, Christmas last year, Carrie wanted something. They only had it at Hobby Lobby. And I went and I got it for her. Right. And what was hilarious was it wasn't an expensive thing. It was like $100 or something. Right. But when she opened it, she goes, how did you get this? Because she knew where it came from. And I looked at her, I was like, what do you mean? She goes, you went to Hobby Lobby and got this for me? And it was like, she almost teared up because she knew I went and did to a place that I hated with the total fiber of my being. Right. But that's part of the communication. And I personally think, we turned this into a marriage counseling episode, but I think the most important thing in a relationship to make it work is actual communication. And sometimes that communication is not pleasant. Sometimes that communication hurts, but I'm of the opinion that I would rather slightly hurt someone's feelings now than let something linger and fester and become a point of resentment and something that can actually block the relationship longer term. And I could cite a couple of events in mine and Carrie's past, and she'll probably come in here and she's probably listening. She's like, I'll tell you what he said. He said this and he said that. But the point is getting it out in the open so that it can be addressed rather than, you joked earlier, Dre, about your dad not liking the spaghetti, right? Like that's a very benign version of it, right? But that's an example of it, right? Where that generation wasn't taught to communicate. They weren't taught to be open about their feelings and things they liked and didn't like. They were taught to suck it up, deal with it, do the best you can, and move on. And I think that's where, I've been asked at church, at, some other areas, because Carrie and I happen to be like the oldest couple, right? Not the oldest people, but the oldest couple that have been together the longest. So like, what's the secret? And they're waiting for some like super, Yoda-like response. And I'm like, just communicate.
Listen like, to the woman.
Right. But it's not just that, right? Like,
and her listen to you, but
right. I know what you were getting at, but that's the kind of those trope, happy wife, happy life kind of things is bullshit, because that's where you get into, well, the guy's like, whatever, as long as she's happy, I don't care. Like, that's how my grandfather was, right? Like, as long as mom is happy, and he just went through life that way. Carrie's dad was that way. He was almost the same age. He's a little bit older than her mom, but like, he was real similar in that regard, right? It was like all the things he did was literally just to make her happy. And I don't know what the guy liked to this day. Like but yeah, I think that's a huge part of it, is the ability to find common ground that's relevant and not force it. Right. Because if you force it, like, I have to do everything that she does, well, then you're going to be miserable. She's going to be able to read it on your face, and vice versa. Like, if you drug Delani to every Lakers game, at some point she's like, bruh, I'm not going. Like, I'm done.
I mean, some interests are deal breakers, right? Like, if I would have met her and she told me she was a San Francisco Giants fan, then I say, we can't be married because clearly you don't know how to make good decisions, and I can't have you mothering my kids and even bringing that into existence. But seriously, when you talk about the communication, I think a lot of people will cite trust as the value, right? But trust doesn't just mean they're going to believe you're doing this or that. It also means that you trust your partner, that if you say something hard, they're not just going to walk out on you. They're actually going to listen to you. You're going to find a way to fix that. Yeah. And I think that we don't have enough respect for each other to trust each other. So in order to trust, you got to have some respect, and you got to have a little gratitude for that person. And look, to be personal, we had a long stretch in our marriage where we were not together, right? Because of, I mean, I think that we would say the same things. I think that the nuances would be different. but I think the things that brought us back together was the actual foundation of our life.
Yeah, I
And
think that's fair.
and though that we weren't together due to some immaturity, due to some selfishness, mostly on my part, that caused her to act another way, which just made it compound. Um, the fact that we could come back to the foundation that we laid when we were in our early 20s and still find that friendship and then rebuild that as we respected each other, co-parenting the whole way, because it wasn't about the kids, it was about us to come back.
Right.
And I think that if you if I didn't have those same set of values from the beginning, then our marriage would have been completely doomed. And each of us be living a different life that I don't even want to try to imagine right now.
Yeah,
And
that makes perfect sense.
And you guys beat the odds, because the Marine Corps is not, it's not kind to marriage.
Well, it's funny you say that, because that's actually why I got out of the Marine Corps, was because I didn't see a way that my marriage was going to stay intact. And I didn't, obviously Dre and Delaney hadn't gone through the problems they were going through yet, but I was kind of seeing that, just generally speaking, right? Like just the challenges of the life of the Marine Corps, especially as a young Marine. And for those that don't know, Carrie was in the Navy when we met. So we had a different set of challenges where we were going to have to like jump through hoops for co-location to be able to get orders to match up. And that was going to be a struggle, because the Marine Corps could care less about your other services, significant other. So we I kind of read those tea leaves, and I was like, I was a risk manager before I was a formally trained risk manager. And I was like, I don't like these odds. I'm gonna punch out. And, and I know without a shadow of a doubt, I made the right decision. I missed everything about the Marine Corps. The career in the Marine Corps would have been the easy part for me. Keeping my family intact would have been really hard. So I definitely, for Dre and Delaney to have had those challenges, it's not surprising. But making it through, it's definitely, a testament. Because I know for all of us in that, they got married in that first enlistment, that the odds have got to be staggeringly against us. Just because we're,
I think it is at that 75%
it's
mark,
if not
right.
higher, right? Like we're probably the only two from our contemporaries. If we went back and did the math, like who else got married in their first enlistment that is still together?
I think Botan and Tringali. I think they're the only ones that come.
Did they make it?
Yeah, here I am busting out names. Shout out, Chris.
Maybe Mike Amy. Weathers. Was Mike Weathers married in his first enlistment, or was
I don't know.
Second? I think
because we didn't meet him until his second, right?
Right.
So,
right. Yeah. Well, second tour, but not a second enlistment.
Okay.
So maybe that's the only other one of all of the Marines that we knew, and other service members even.
John right? Tiffany.
He wasn't married. He lived in the barracks.
Oh. Well, he's been married forever now.
Unless he was a GEOBAT back then.
I think he was.
Was he?
And hey, comment, John. Listen to my damn show.
Yeah, what's up, Tiff?
So,
with your cranky ass. I don't know where we landed on that. Oh, go ahead, Brian.
I was just gonna, as the middle-aged bachelor of the group, I don't have any marriage tips, but I can go on and on about why relationships fail from personal experience. But
that's probably not helpful.
Well, with 7 combat deployments and how Mama handled home, I'd like to say that I was lucky, but I don't think I was. I think it was something that we created. I think that I chose right, and also I think Pearl and the Red Pill guys are like, hey, one of her poll questions was, hey, if you're married and your wife gains 50 pounds, is that a W or an L?
For who?
For the husband, for the man. These are man-centered questions. If your wife gained 50 pounds, is that a W? Is that a win?
Well, it depends if she was anorexic or not before she gained 50
pounds.
Right.
A lot of them said no, like there's expectations. But again, that's something you have to lay out in the beginning.
Well, I'll go ahead and share that since you brought it up. So that was actually one of the early conversations that Carrie and I had that she didn't appreciate. So I'll paint the picture. We're sitting at a family dinner, and by family, an extended family dinner. There's about 15 people at a table in a Cheddar's somewhere in Texas. I don't remember where in Texas, either Dallas or Houston. And Carrie and I had only been married for a couple of years. And I don't know what prompted it. I don't remember. But she hits me with if I got fat, would you still love me? And the whole table got quiet and looked at me. And my first answer was, define fat.
Not define love.
and the gist, and now I was super young at the time, right? So my ability to use my words wasn't very good. But the point that I was trying to make was, well, first of all, I'll always love you because you're, at the time, the mother of my daughter, not my kids. I said, I'll always love you. And I said, but I think you're asking me a different question. And she goes, yeah, would you find me attractive? And that was when I said, qualify how fat we're talking about. And I remember my phrase. I said, are we talking about just a little heavy, or are we talking about medically disgusting? Was the language that I used. And she's like, what's the difference? And I said, here's the thing. And I'm going to be really honest. I said, it would bother me if you let yourself go that badly, because it would make me question what was going on in your head. And, are you mentally, like, did something go wrong, or are you physically having something wrong with you? Like, there's a whole lot of side issues there. I said, but at the end of the day, I was like, I'm not really into really big girls. And she got all upset. And I understand why. And I understand how insensitive and cold this sounds. And for all the listeners, I was like 22 years old. So if you're hating me for having said that as a 22-year-old, I'm sorry. But here's the point that I was trying to make with her. I said, look, would you rather me just tell you, yeah, honey, get as fat as you want, and then watch you eat yourself into, morbid obesity? Or would you want to know that it does matter to me at some level? And, there's an expectation that we take care of ourselves together. Because, if I had lied to her, then, 10, 20 years from now, she's, I don't know what qualifies as medically disgusting, 300, 400 pounds for a woman, a little large. And I wouldn't feel the same about her that I do now. And then our relationship would suffer. And then I'm a liar because I told her it was okay. I mean, this isn't going to be received well by the high calorie Americans that are listening to the show, but like, that's just a reality for me. And I felt it necessary to be honest with my wife, and I was. And, she's brought it up to me, as you can imagine, an innumerable number of times in the past 25, 26 years. Right. But it was just an example of me being honest with her. And, somebody's in the comments probably going to tell me that I'm the reason that people have eating disorders, and that might be true. And I'll own that. But what was important to me was being honest with my wife and not lying to her. And I knew what the answer was, and I wasn't going to lie to myself so I could lie to her with good faith or with a clear conscience. So,
as the middle-aged bachelor of the group, maybe this doesn't mean much, but what if you'd ask her the same question? I mean, we always kind of vilify the man for wanting his wife to stay, young and hot.
And by the way, she is still young and hot, for those that don't know my wife. So like my evil plan worked.
But I mean, women want attractive men too. It's not like we have a monopoly on that, on wanting physical attractiveness. I think we value it a bit more than women do.
For sure.
But I mean, I think that's what a marriage is. You're not just committing to staying with the person no matter how bad it gets. You're committing to making sure it's as best as it can be for the other person and counting on them to do the same thing. And part of that is taking care of yourself, understanding that that the person you married is not an angel, you can't expect them to be happy about it if you let yourself go.
No, and I think that was what the 22-year-old me was trying to say, right? Like, right, it was a little bit more sophisticated of an answer than, don't be medically disgusting, but like, that's what came out.
I would have just been like, ew, no.
But we really do need to. I think we're just creatures that live for others and are here to serve. And I think that a lot of people that get divorced, a lot of their sightings are, he didn't make me happy. Mm-hmm. She didn't make me happy. I want this thing, they're not it, without even trying to find some common ground. It's like, well, I'm not in love, so goodbye,
Yeah,
I'm out.
we fell out of love. We're different
Right.
people, rather than have those uncomfortable conversations to try to
or
get
or
back to
maybe it's
center.
just because I got married poor, and I don't think Delani's gonna slap me for saying this, but she was not in shape when we got married. So she actually over the course of our marriage lost 100 pounds. So she went from a plus size lady to a Zumba instructor, spin cycle, yoga, right? Um, and I don't think that I was the reason that she wanted to be fit. I think that I factored in, but I think it was a moment when our toddler, our youngest child, ran down the street and she couldn't catch her. So you start, mom instincts start kicking in. I I'm not going to be on the planet longer if I'm not healthy. I'm not going to be the best parent because I can't physically do some things, and I'm also not a very good example, right? So how am I supposed to tell my kids to eat their vegetables if I'm not doing it,
Mm-hmm.
right? If I'm not at least eating healthier. I mean, my kids are going to be more on the macros than it is vegetables, but it is what it is. Um, I think we also have to be that example. And also, what are you showing your kids when you're not committing to their mother, to their father, that
Mm-hmm.
they don't have to commit? And why should they even listen to you? Right? So here they have to commit as a child, and you have to commit as a parent. Why should they when you can't even commit on a vow that you made years ago with the
Right.
person that you're supposed to be creating this life with? I think that we just don't recognize the stakes
Yeah,
that we're
I
in,
I agree.
and that's why they all fail. But if you see the stakes, envision the stakes, and then commit to them, I think that the marriage will have a much, much higher success rate. And that's not to say that if you check all the boxes, that it's still not a risk, because the other person has a say too, right? It's like it's like when you're playing football and your plays are all drawn out, like, okay, that this should work if I execute it properly. Well, the other team has a say. They're
Mm-hmm.
playing defense on the other side. So,
Yeah.
but if everything's in harmony,
Well, that's
you're
why I
you're
remember as
good.
a kid, my parents divorced, and
Uh,
we were really involved in the church. And I remember there's somebody saying, I don't remember where I heard it from because I was young. I was 7 or 8. I remember somebody saying, if two people are Christians and they're married, there's no reason that they should ever get divorced.
no
And
reason.
I remember hearing that as a kid. Yeah, I mean that was it's very. I don't know if it was Southern Baptist Church at the time. I was too young to know denominations, but it was very, much. You should just pray on it, make it happen, make it work out, et cetera, et cetera. And I remember even as a kid thinking, hmm, that's it's a bold strategy, Cotton. Like, like I remember thinking that as a kid, and then my parents got divorced, which, as you can imagine, then put some weird thoughts in my head as a young kid, right? I'm like, well, wait a second. Some pastor said that if two people are Christians and there's no reason to get divorced, and my parents just got divorced, so which one of them aren't Christians? I remember that happening and that kind of being in the back of my mind also. So, you're right. It does take both sides. Both sides have to try. Both sides have to work. And admittedly, this is one of the things, Dre, that you and I have talked about that I think the Jehovah's Witnesses are super cool with their whole, marriage being the centerpiece and not doing Christmas, but, celebrating the anniversary of the parents and
Yeah,
all
yeah.
that kind of stuff. I think that's an amazing, I think it's a really good kind of centering behavior, rather than focusing on some fictitious fat dude. I mean, he's not fictitious. He actually existed, but he's not still alive. Um, um, this mythical dude that drops presents off. You're getting presents because you're all committed to your parents' marriage, and the marriage is healthy and strong, and that's why we're all here today. That you kids all exist because of our marriage. So have a day, treat yourself.
And honestly, as a child, that's one of the things that helps my brother and I cope, you know,
In your
by
own
missing out on
relationships.
on missing out on holidays, right?
Oh,
So here I am down the street. Everyone's got presents on December 25th, and
mm-hmm.
and we don't, right? So But on January 16th, which is my parents' anniversary, we had our own celebration, and it
Right.
was a big deal. My dad made a
Right.
big deal of it, and so did my mother, and we all exchanged gifts, and it was, it was basically Christmas,
Right.
but it was the centering of the family.
Yeah. I think
And
it's
it
cool.
is one of the things I've appreciated of my crazy childhood.
I would hereby motion that all Christians no longer celebrate Christmas in the manner that they do and celebrate their anniversaries.
We should have a whole podcast on this because I got things to say about
Christmas.
I think we will. I think we will.
Yeah.
I also think that we went long on this segment, and
Yeah.
Hey, look, just because statistics say you're going to get divorced, it doesn't mean that you are. Just like there's statistics on auto wrecks and things of that nature, but if you drive better, the likelihood of you crashing your car is much better. Don't drive like a jackass. Don't be a jackass of a husband slash wife, and your marriage will be better.
Right.
Put in some work, man. The life isn't easy. Nothing we do is easy, and everything that we do is hard is usually worth it in the end. So,
except I would, for the record, being married to Carrie has been the easiest thing I've ever done in my life. That's Carrie with a C, Carrie.
She's pretty good to you.
I started to say I outpunted my coverage, but you wouldn't have understood the analogy.
He said he's banging on the Hamilton best of wives, best of women.
Right. No, but I mean, it is still work, and everybody's got to lean in. And if you're showing up to a thing saying like, what's in it for me, then you're looking at it wrong. It's more of the JFK speech, right? You don't ask what marriage does for you. You ask what you can do for your marriage. And if you're approaching it that way, it's going to work out as long as you're both doing the same thing. But that's all about selection. And it's more about that than anything else, right? It's about picking at least with the right things, that you're looking for.
And just like I tell my kids and told all my Marines before they leave the office or the house, don't suck.
Right.
Just don't suck.
But there is a broader topic here to consider about the obstacles to marriage to marriage lasting are greater than they've ever been, and the obstacles to even starting a marriage that's set up for success are greater than they've ever been. I mean, that the world has transformed dramatically over the past 100 years, and we don't think of it that way because we're in it, and it most of the features of the modern world that create these obstacles, they were here long before we got here, but we haven't really adapted to them as a civilization. Like it used to be, most people didn't travel 50 miles from where they were born, and so all of your options are right there within a horse riding distance. Everyone's probably pretty much going to have the same values you have, the same worldview, the same options for entertainment and recreation, so that it's just it wasn't that hard to find the right one. If you married somebody within 50 miles of where you lived, odds are they were going to be pretty much like you culturally, morally. They'd have the same set of expectations. We just don't have that.
Yeah, but that doesn't. But you're presenting that as if that's a good thing, and I don't know that I would agree with that.
In fact, I would.
It's a good thing for marriage
in my marriage that it worked out that we are from different cultures.
Yeah, I mean,
because we were so different, and in spite of being that different, had the same baseline values. It gave perspective that we could lend one another, and then we both were better for it. I got to see things that I'd never seen before in family structure and just safety and religious values. And I don't know what she got out of me, but I think it's just the diversity of Southern California, and even in her own church, the difference between Salt Lake and San Diego is night and day. So I think that she got to add perspectives, which added to her wisdom, and it made us who we are and where we're going.
Yeah, I think this is, Brian. I don't want to discredit what you're saying or dismiss what you're saying, because I get it, right. And I do know what you're getting at. I think the perspective is you're viewing that from the lens of a person who's still single, right?
Well, yeah, sure.
And you're seeing that as the primary challenge. And I'm not saying that's not a challenge, but I also would argue that
I don't deny that. I'm not saying a marriage is automatically doomed to fail if you come from that diversity of backgrounds, as you guys as you guys demonstrate. But the fact is, I'm on the other side of a growing statistic of people, failing to find that lifelong spouse or getting divorced if they do. And it's made me think a lot about why that is. What kind of obstacles did I go through that through most of human history up until 5 minutes ago, those obstacles weren't there. And so we didn't have these. And it's not just, birth rates are declining all over the world. I mean, this is actually the decline of marriage and the decline of marriage success, along with the decline of, a lot of the children who are being born, it's out of wedlock, which leads to, all the social problems we've already discussed. But birth rates themselves in general are down, which is going to lead to population collapses. And, that it's not looking good for the next 20, 30 years of humanity if we keep going in the direction we're going.
It's good if you're Bill Gates, right? It's what you want.
Yeah, well, if you're an anti-human demon, it's awesome news.
With big moobs.
Well,
yeah. Yeah, and I also think there's probably a big challenge from what I'm seeing, just with my kids, but more my daughter and then guys that I know like you, Brian, that I think every year that you go without being married, I think it makes it that much harder as you go down the path, right? Because you become more kind of locked in your ways. And like, I think that was one of the things, like, I was 20 when I got married.
Yeah.
Same. Yeah.
And so, Carrie and I talk about this, we grew up together. You know what I mean? Like it's kind of weird to say that out loud because we were adults, but we weren't, and I'm sure I'm saying this now as a 46-year-old man. And I'm sure when I'm 66, I'll be like, I didn't know shit back then when I'm in my 40s, kind of thing, because perspective is so important to it. But we talk about this all the time, that we grew up together and we learned so many things as a young married couple. And some of that was how to raise kids, right? Like a lot of your child raising when you're young, it's an experiment. You're like, I don't know what to do with this kid. Let me try this and see what happens. And hopefully I didn't break them. Right. And then like you do, and then you look back and you're like, oh, they're still alive. Sweet. There's a lot of that doesn't get talked about. I think a lot of people think that there's like some kind of magical clarity that you get when you're married and have kids and you just know what to do. And like, I never had a clue. In fact, there was one
another issue. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say this one time, and I won't get into what happened. It's really personal, but Alyssa had committed a transgression, and she and I were having this big heart to heart. And we were sitting in her room, and it wasn't a fun conversation. She was in a lot of trouble, and I remember her being kind of snippy with me, which was cute because she was the one that had messed up, not me. And I said, "Hey, I'm going to let you in on a secret, but you got to promise not to tell anybody, okay?" And she was like, "Okay." And I'm like, "No, I'm serious. You can't tell anybody." And she's like, "Okay, Dad, I won't." And I leaned over and I'm like, "I've never raised a kid before. I don't have a freaking clue what I'm doing." And she kind of laughed, right? She broke the tension in the moment. And I was like, everything that I do, when I make a decision, ground you or whatever, like I'm just throwing dice down. I'm like, let's see what happens. Oh crap. Screwed up. Craps. Or hard 4 or hard 8, whatever. Like it's all guesswork. And so that's all the more reason why, I think to a certain degree, getting into I'm actually strangely an advocate of getting married as young as possible versus waiting for the quote unquote perfect person, because I think that's part of the problem. I think, Dre, you said paralysis by analysis earlier. And I think that's a lot of what's happening is I think people are overanalyzing and they're looking for perfect, rather than realizing that perfect is just what's in front of you.
And there's this culture that says to go out and sow your oats. Spend your 20s sleeping around and hooking up and just kind of going through people. And you're not really set up for marriage that way, if for either sex.
No, not at all.
Right.
In fact, going back to, I just made this comment, and this just kind of hit me in real time. I remember one of my pastors, and I don't remember which pastor it was, so I can't give him credit, but they were talking about the word perfect, and that we use the word perfect to mean without fault. But biblically, whenever God talks about perfection, he's talking about perfection related to his design, which is different from how we see perfection from a scientific view, right? And so the point of that being is that, Dre and Delani's marriage was perfect for them. It wasn't a perfect marriage in a scientific, if you graded it out, right? But it was what was right for them because they made it work, and they've ended up with 3 good kids and all those kinds of things, right? And I think sometimes we're looking for real perfection, and what we need is perfection of the event when it comes to life, because life is messy, right? Like the whole thing is one big messy ball of bad decisions and emotion.
And you kids out there, you hear the horror stories of once you're married, it's over. I promise you, as a young married person, I had way more sex than you. Just promise. I don't care how studly of a dude you are, picking up chicks and hoes at the bar, doing those things.
Oh, that's funny.
By having my best friend at home with me every day. And
you're not
really,
wrong though.
And it's even better too, because we get to explore and experiment, and
you can laugh,
do the things and laugh, and even if like, hey, that wasn't good, you suck. All right, well, I'll do better. In fact, give me about 8 seconds. We'll get back in here. But also a lot of people that don't want to have kids, they cite like, hey, you're stuck at home with kids. I'm doing whatever it is that I want to do. Chelsea Handler, all the time, she'll have on her Instagram, she's at the top of some big beautiful mountain. Well, guess what I get to do? And I'm
a cope.
Chelsea Handler and I were born the same year. My kids are now grown, so I get to do all the things that she does, even though she gets to do a little bit more because she's rich and I'm not. Okay. But I also had the feeling and the experience of the other stuff. I had my son and my daughters and my grandchildren and my wife. And when I go sit at the top of the mountain, I'm not taking a picture alone. I'm taking a picture with her, right? I'm doing all the things with somebody that I, as Matt would put it, grew up with. I'm telling you, if it works, if it sticks, like it's way better than being single and by yourself. Why? I've done both, and I've come out the other side.
If it does not fit, you must acquit.
That's right. So Chelsea, I know you watch. And, I too get to do whatever I want, just because I have responsibilities to things, and I believe that I should be there for others. Maybe
I can do whatever I want all the time, but I'm going to be honest, I'd rather have a wife and kids. I kind of screwed that up. So
but it's not too late for you, Brian. We got you. We got you, dog.
Which is why you got to put your socials. Don't worry. Just, hey, ladies, send me an email.
Third helix.
Sorry, that wasn't a. We got to stop doing that. I was
send an email. I'm the one that reads the emails. I'll vet them. It'll be fine. Yeah,
okay.
It'll be good.
I think we've probably done that enough. That's probably it'll take now.
Well, we've done it enough when you're saying your vows.
You don't want it, or at least a date, for the love of goodness graciousness.
Well, that's that part's not the problem.
We're not suggesting Brian doesn't get dates, but we're suggesting that he hasn't found the forever person yet.
And none of the girls I go out with have heard of our podcast. So
well, that's part of the problem.
That is part of the problem.
You got to swing that celebrity around. Come on.
Right. Also, we were just talking about values, for crying out loud. If you don't listen to the podcast, you clearly don't have the same values as Brian. So can I ask? Does Western culture see Jesus the same way he's supposed to be portrayed, in the good book?
That's a good question, Dre. Can you
So
elaborate?
I was about to ask you what in the world that
Right.
means. What in the wide world of sports does
So
that mean?
so a lot of people will say that Christianity uses God as a weapon by saying that he's this or that, usually on the conservative side, and when really the Jesus of the Gospels, I've heard that he was liberal. Perhaps he was even a hippie, that he hung out with thugs and prostitutes and did these things. And I know that my two esteemed colleagues have thoughts on this.
Also, he was super nice and never raised his voice to anybody. He never argued, never said anything hurtful or disagreeable.
Never fashioned a whip.
Never did anything violent, like chasing people with
You saying Jesus was a cracker?
Whip crack away, whip crack away, whip crack away. That's from Oklahoma, and that's for both of you.
I have not seen that.
Okay.
Yeah. But
so was Jesus a hippie? Was he a liberal?
No, he was not.
I mean, so those are two different things, first of all.
Well,
right?
yeah.
Like you're throwing all these different words out.
There's a lot of overlap, though.
Right? Well,
there is a lot of overlap.
There can be, but there doesn't have to be, right?
Well, that's why we have you, Matthew.
I mean, I would not say he was a hippie. I think where that conflation comes from is there was a lot of communal dialogue, right? That Jesus was known to have said, right? Of talking about giving up your belongings, helping each other. I think that's it as far as I'm aware of his writings. It was that communal concept, which was more about the time than it was about his socioeconomic belief system.
And he typically said that in specific in a specific context,
in a parable, or he was trying to make a point with it.
Well, it wasn't a parable. The rich young ruler came to him and said, "Rabbi, what must I do to inherit eternal life?" And Jesus said, "Well, what's the law say? How do you read it?" And he conspicuously mentioned all of the kind of the horizontal stuff, like how you treat your fellow man, don't murder, honor your parents, don't steal, et cetera, et cetera. And Jesus said, "Well, we'll do this and you will live." And the rich young man said, "Well, all these I have kept since I was a boy." And so then he basically, because he left out everything related to God, and there's and he was, a lot of times people came to Jesus with a question that basically amounted to, and this is kind of relevant to our marriage conversation, because it was the same thing when they asked him about, is it right for a man to divorce his wife for any reason? A lot of times people came to Jesus with a question that amounted to, well, what's the least I got to do?
They were trying to get a workaround to the law, and they were like, well, there's this new guy in town is different, and let me see if I can get him to say give me a different answer, right?
Well, part of it, but it was essentially, what's the least I got to do to keep the law, to keep God off my back, to placate God, so I can put these questions of righteousness and pleasing God behind me and pursue what I'm really interested in. Like, if this was the rich young ruler just wanted to enjoy his wealth. And so when Jesus answered them according to those terms, if being justified under the law, it was, oh, well, easy, absolute perfection is the answer you're looking for. You have to be absolutely perfect and give up everything, give it to the poor, and then come follow me. Or it's not right for any man to divorce his wife for any reason, because in the beginning, God made them male and female, so that the two would become one flesh, and a man will leave his father and mother. And I kind of mixed up the order, but the point is, absolute perfection is the standard. But anyway, to your point, the point was not, in order to be righteous, every person has to give up everything that they have and give it to the poor, and then be homeless and impoverished. It was just in that specific instance where he was trusting in his wealth as his main value in life. So I kind of got us off track a little bit.
I don't think you did at all.
Was Jesus a hippie? That's
so. So why do you think there's a push to say that Jesus was these things that are kind of Western values today? Like,
well, it's a modern version.
Own your truth, and
it's a modern version of what Brian just said, right? It's people So if you back up, the religion has been used by people for societal control since the beginning of time, right? It's probably one of the stronger stances that fuels atheists, right? They're like, it's not real. It's just this thing that people make up so that they can control other people. But societal control is a real thing. And, going back to Jesus's era, and that's a lot of what he accused the Pharisees and the Sadducees of, right, was using their position of influence to their benefit, which is what led to the whips and the table flippings and all that kind of stuff as a more specific case in point, right? And for those that, I guess we probably shouldn't just gloss over that in case somebody's listening and go, what are you talking about? I don't remember the verse. I'm sure Brian does, but there was an instance where
Jesus, John, for sure.
Okay. Jesus happened upon a temple, and the temple was full of, I'm just going to say people. Some of them were priests and some weren't, but they'd essentially turned the temple.
They're money changers.
Right. But they had turned the temple into a flea market, for lack of a better term, right? There were people doing loans. There were loan sharks. They were, they were selling things, and well, there was a lot of stuff going on that was being done in the temple. And
they had turned the court of the Gentiles into a place to sell sacrifices. Like that was the main thing.
Right.
Like people would, like you had to travel from, pilgrims had to come from far away. You couldn't bring your livestock with you. So people would just bring money to buy a sacrifice. And so rather than set up shop outside of the temple, they would set up in the court of the Gentiles, which crowded out. If Gentiles wanted to come to worship, then they had to do it amid all this livestock and manure and feed and with all this haggling over prices. And so that's what pissed him off. How dare you turn my father's house into a marketplace?
So that's a lot that I've never actually read in text, but it's not worth litigating. But the point of it all is when Jesus saw it, he basically flipped and literally started flipping, and he produced a whip from somewhere. I don't know if it was one of the livestock handlers or if he just rolled around like Indiana Jones and had his own whip on him all the time. But he essentially ran them out of the temple.
Give me the idol.
Right. So that's always a great kind of thing to keep in your back pocket when people talk about Jesus being this super chill, never got angry, never told people no or not to do this or that. And the really interesting thing with that as a backdrop is to think about Jesus getting that upset and using a whip on people, and then laying that up against the reality that Jesus was still perfect and never sinned. And that actually warms my heart.
Wait, say that again?
The fact that Jesus could be brought to anger, right?
Right.
And was physically assaulting evildoers. And then you lay that up against the reality that he was a perfect human and never sinned.
Are you saying this undermines
No, I'm saying it bears deeper legitimacy when you think about it in those terms. To him flipping his shit on the people in the temple was 100% righteous for him to do so.
Right. There's some sort of belief out there that you have to be some kind of stoic,
a pacifist,
calm, passive.
Right. That's the point that I'm making,
right? Because that's also a parable that if you don't do those things, then you're missing the mark. You're sinning.
That's exactly the point that I was trying to make.
Jesus himself talk about like, hey, it's time to pull the sword out. Let's go.
Right.
Sometimes when I'm in debate with other Christians, I like, they'll tell me I'm not being Christ-like because I might call them out on if they're being intellectually dishonest, or
you should start carrying a bullwhip with you.
Well, I tell them,
and you should be like, you know what, you're right.
I do that rhetorically. I tell them,
Hugh John Williams.
I tell them, you're right, you faithless, perverse generation. How long should I stay with you? How long should I put up with you, you brood of vipers?
Yeah,
because he said that to his own disciples when they couldn't drive out a demon. And so he wasn't, he was always kind, but he was rarely nice.
Well, I it's funny. it'd be a long-winded story to bring back up. So I don't know how to regenerate the whole conversation. But I remember once a while back, Dre and I were having a conversation about prophets. And I made a comment that, an easy way to determine if a modern day person is a prophet is just listen to them speak. And if they seem like a normal, well-adjusted human, they're probably not a prophet, because most of the quotes by biblical prophets, they seem to be kind of in a different mental state, right? And I'm just, this is Matt talking, right? That it strikes me that they had so much going on in their heads. If they could actually hear the voice of God on a constant basis, that would put you in a really different kind of mental state of being, as opposed to a regular person just kind of interacting. And it would be really hard to just make casual jokes and, kind of be a flip human being when you actually can hear God's voice telling you what's wrong with everybody around you. Right. Like, and I get that sense, like you said, that he wasn't necessarily when I read things that he did and said, he doesn't strike me as the guy that sat around the campfire telling jokes outside of his prophecy, right? Like, so there I was with God one day.
I don't know. I'm not sure about that. I mean, the Sermon on the Mount, there's some funny stuff in there. Like when he rebukes people for when you give to the poor, don't announce it with trumpets.
Right.
Like if you just pick,
it's funny to you now with your your broken sense of humor, thanks to the Marine Corps and this life that you've lived, you can find humor. And I don't think it was funny to anybody he was saying it to.
I think I think it was meant to be funny when, imagine somebody giving to the poor and then having an entourage of trumpet players.
I bet they did.
The public.
I bet there were rich people that did that kind of stuff.
No, that's hyperbole. Lots of what Jesus said was hyperbole done for comic effect.
People do it today. Look at The Rock and Oprah.
Oh, well, yeah, but they didn't have literal trumpet players, but.
Well, no, but that's what that was.
Do you not worry about the speck in your brother's eye when you have a log in your own eye? That was hyperbole. But also,
well, of course it was, but it wasn't. I mean, obviously he doesn't mean a literal log, but what he meant was, when your backyard's dirtier than your neighbor's, how dare you criticize your neighbor?
Well, yeah, we know what he meant, but that was a comical picture of somebody with a log in their eye and trying to fish out the speck in the other person's eye. That was kind of funny at the time. Yeah. One of the funniest episodes.
Pretty Fozzie Bear. Jesus was like, a log in your eye, waka, waka, waka.
But also when he rose from the dead and appeared to them, this always bugs me when people preach sermons on this. When he shows up, the text says, he says, peace be upon you. And people will preach whole sermons on, the peace that Jesus came to give them.
Really,
he was like, telling them, calm your tits. Yeah, because they were like, oh my
God. A customary Jewish greeting is Shalom Aleichem, which is the same thing Arabs say when they say Salam Alaikum.
Yeah.
It's just peace be upon. He showed up and he's like, hey, what's up? Like, he's all nonchalant about it and says, Shalom, y'all.
That's an interesting take. I always assumed he was trying to calm them down because they were losing their stuff overseas. And
no, I think he was cracking wise when he was just that. He's just like, what's up, homies? And then they're freaking out, and he's like, I said shalom, y'all. And then
I think it says more about you, Brian, that you're finding tons of humor in Jesus's speeches.
I think you'll see it when you.
No, I don't think I will. In fact, in my so this is almost a Talladega Nights kind of thing, but like, I kind of picture Jesus if he was giving a sermon and then there's a Brian snickering, he'd be like,
man, I don't think so. I mean, I
was saying,
I think the crowd would have been chuckling when he said that. I think he was, cracking jokes to the crowd to kind of get him on board, and then he'd drop hammers like, if you look at a woman lustfully, you've already committed adultery with her in your heart. And
someone's like, hey, that's right. Yeah, you should.
Well, that's
you're serious.
That's tough. The other stuff was the comic relief to break the tension ankles from that, but
it wasn't my fault. Her hair wasn't covered.
But that's kind of, that goes to our overall discussion of, is Jesus how we imagine him to be?
Right.
He was pretty. We think of him as all stoic and Prozac'd out, and he's just kind of
He had the long hair and the
unapproachable.
sandals.
Yeah, but like, come on, man. When he was what? He was 8 and his parents lost him.
Well,
12. They literally lost their kid and then they find him like 3 days later. And they're like, where have you been? He's like, where do you think I've been, woman? I've been in my father's house taking care of business. That ain't a normal 12-year-old.
well, he didn't really say it like that. It was more.
I'm pretty sure I just recited that verbatim.
Yeah, but you're assigning a modern connotation to it. Like the word
Because
was
I don't do a good like Yiddish accent. Hey,
because they were Yiddish. they were German.
But I mean, a lot of stuff Jesus said was pretty hilarious, and he had a pretty biting wit that I think would have almost certainly got laughs at the time.
I mean, look, I know for a fact that God has a sense of humor. Otherwise, I would be dead by now already. But like that notwithstanding, I don't know that I read much humor into the words of Christ.
Well, pray about it. You'll
God, could you show me the humor in your words?
ask God to help you lighten up.
No, I don't think I need help with that.
So I don't think we got anywhere with this. I think that we still just see that dude the way we see him.
So what I was starting to say to answer your question directly was I think it's very similar to what Brian was saying about Jesus in his day, right? Like people were coming to Jesus trying to get him to give them back doors or circumvent parts of the law. Hey, Jesus, what do you think about this? They're hoping he would give them an out, right? Like an easy button. And I think that's much what people are doing today is they're trying to mold things he said or did such that it can justify their behavior, even though despite the fact that they know it's wrong. Like, so back to the log in your eye, right? Like, I mean, Metallica probably made it overly popular, but the whole judge not lest ye be judged yourself is probably one of the most widely used misquotes of Jesus, right? At least from my point of view, from what I've seen, like it gets used all the damn time. And every time it's used, the person is suggesting that we're not allowed to judge. And this absolutely not the correct interpretation of that comment, right? Like the commentary was, you should strive to be righteous so you can then hold your brothers accountable so that they can also strive for righteousness because, you know, iron sharpens iron, all that kind of stuff. Like that's the point, right? The point isn't, oh, you're right, I can't judge because I got a pole in my eye, so I got to turn and look away and not watch what you're doing, right? Like, no, I got to pull this out of my own eye so I can help you, so we can help each other and we can all be better together. But that's not how pop culture would have you believe that to mean.
The irony of that is to judge someone in the sense he's talking about is to exercise authority over them. Like that's what
right.
When it talks about the book of Judges, these were leaders who rose up. Judging is to exercise authority over someone.
Right.
That doesn't mean saying that what you're doing is calling evil good or good evil. But the irony is when they say that, what they mean is if you're not a good Christian unless you're condoning sin.
Right. Right.
But what they are doing is deciding on their own authority that what God has condemned as sin is actually okay. They're basically putting themselves in the position of God and deciding that, well, because
actually, I don't know that I agree with that. What I think it is they know they're wrong, but they believe Jesus said, I'm not allowed to tell them they're wrong. Well, that's actually because why would they care about my judgment if what they were doing was okay in God's eyes?
I think sure. I mean, but I'm just taking the meaning of their words on their at face value. And yeah, you're probably correct in psychologizing them. Although I do think that we have such a shallow understanding of what morality is that, like, you know, a moral compass requires an external reference point. Just like a compass needs magnetic north for the needle to work. Mm-hmm. So a moral compass needs an external standard. Most people just have a moral compass and don't think about where the needle points. They think, and they're not considering there's all kinds of other interference with it that throws the needle off. They just think that because they feel this, just their own unexamined feelings that have been inculcated into them by culture, by the stories they've watched that have told them, that have modeled values for them, that they just kind of passively and uncritically accepted. I think a lot of people really think that just because they feel it, that makes it right. And that's
for sure. Yeah, absolutely.
But the irony is, if they understood it correctly, but that's the definition of self-righteousness, that your feelings are the measure of rightness. And you can go around imposing that on people by telling Christians, you're not allowed to call what the Bible calls evil, evil, because I say, you have heard that the Bible says,
like when the Chick-fil-A guy, the reporter went at the CEO of Chick-fil-A and was like, well, do you believe that gays should marry? And he's like, you know damn well what I'm going to say to that, and yet you're basically daring me to either, you know, acknowledge my Christian beliefs as being correct, or you want me to tell you it's okay to do whatever you want to do. Like,
yeah, and he's basically superimposing a different moral standard over the Bible and demanding compliance with it, and setting himself up as judge in the process.
Yep.
But
yeah, but Dre, to answer your question directly, that's what I think is happening with you know, modernity, and when people take and talk about Jesus, they cherry pick the parts that they think give them justification for their own decisions about what it is they want to do, irrespective of their actual beliefs of right and wrong. And that's why I think they do it. I truly don't think that they think that it makes it okay. I think they know they're wrong. And it's like, you know, when people like to be wrong in groups, it seems to take away some of the, you know, the guilt. It's like, well, he's doing it too. You know, you go to your parents and you're like, why did you cut class? Well, my friends cut class. Well, if everybody jumped off a Brit, yeah, I would. If they jumped off, I'm jumping off too. Like,
I think religion is like any other marketplace. It's shaped by consumer demand. If there's a demand for a Jesus who is just me writ large, churches will provide that.
Yeah, they do.
And so
they do.
We see it all over the place.
And so people shop around for churches that tell them what they already believe and and that will conform to the values they already have, which, you know, we talked a few weeks ago, we talked about how, you know, the one thing that all established religions have in common is that they acknowledge that the teachings of the religion are eternal and immutable, and you come to the religion to conform to it because you are temporary and unenlightened, and you come to it to find wisdom and enlightenment, and in so doing, immortality by aligning yourself with what's permanent and eternal.
Yeah,
we have the complete opposite view of that today. We have the Aleister Crowley version of finding the true will, except that version is so commonplace now that it's trite. It's just
it is my observation that in that same vein that the United States Armed Forces have gone down the same path. It used to be when you joined the Marine Corps, you stripped off everything that was you and you were broken down to the basic level, and then you conformed to the institution itself.
Got to put on a uniform.
That's why it's called a uniform. Everyone wearing the same thing. And we have, but I want to do this or I want to do that, and I don't. Humanity says that you should be able to, and then we start going down the slippery slope of allowing all these different standards to be in an organization that's really supposed to win wars. And
remember when I was pretty early in my journalism career, a colleague wrote this article about this a gay woman in the military. This was before
the Don't Ask, Don't Tell was repealed.
Right. And and it was this big hagiography of this noble, virtuous woman who just wanted to serve her country, and be able to express herself as an individual. And like the person who wrote it, like there was never any attention given to so I read it afterwards, and we were talking about it over drinks at one point, and I'm just like, everybody has to get the same haircut and wear a uniform when you join the military, right? And she just kind of looked at me blankly. What do you mean? You're supposed to conform to them. Like, you don't go for individual self-expression. But the whole idea was just totally foreign to her, and just never really entered into the article. But those are the kinds of things that shape our culture and our expectations, and religion does the same thing. They got to get butts in seats. They got to give them a Jesus that appeals to them. And I don't even think every preacher does this deliberately.
I think they do to some degree. So I don't want to speak for all, but I can't help but believe that there's a point at some day or in a sermon as they're writing their sermon notes out, and they're like, oh, I better not say that. I better just move on from this point, right? Because it's not going to be well received or they know a certain person in the church family that's going through something that's related to this. And if they hit it too hard, it's going to upset their parents and their grandparents and their aunt and uncle, who are all members and are, maybe one's on the elder board. You know what I mean? Like, I can't believe that doesn't happen.
I there's almost certainly that temptation to, like, every time you're writing a sermon, I think there's always the understanding that everything you say can have an impact on how large your congregation stays.
Mm-hmm.
And that's gonna, and I'm not saying they're deliberately crafting their sermon to that, but they have to be aware of that, and that temptation, I'm sure, influences what they do. But even without that, though, let's just give everyone the benefit of the doubt, just for the sake of argument, and assume nobody has that temptation. Nobody is thinking about that doesn't factor into what they say. The fact of the matter is still that the marketplace is going to reward those preachers who present the most popular, appealing version of God and Jesus. And so that's going to become the market standard. That's going to become what's normative. That's going to be the popular version of Christianity.
Well, you look at these mega churches, then that's precisely what they are.
Yeah. And
they're chock full of the sermons you want to hear, not the sermons you don't want to hear.
Right. And everybody loves beating up on Joel Osteen because he's such an egregious example of this. But I don't think your garden variety conservative preacher is that much different. I don't think they're lying. I think they're being sincere, but they kind of fit what the marketplace demands, and that's why they're there, and that's why they're popular. And that's why Jesus warned against wide gates and broad paths. And there's an episode in Luke chapter, I think 9, maybe it's 14. Anyway, it says large crowds were following Jesus. And so he turned and said to them, unless a man hates his father and mother, his brothers and sisters, his wife and children, even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. And he said pretty much the same thing in other occasions, but it was more palatable. It was, if you love your father and mother more than me, you're not worthy of me. But here, I think he deliberately crafted that for maximum offense, precisely because of that large crowd, because he didn't want...
He wanted to weed out as many as he could of the hangers on versus the true believers.
He didn't want half-hearted enthusiasts. He wanted people who are fully devoted and committed and willing to give up everything to follow him.
Also not funny, by the way.
But he
waka waka waka.
If he was going for laughs, though, he would have killed.
But
he was going for minimal popularity there.
For those listening at home, in case you didn't know what the word was, because I didn't, a hagiography is a biography of a saint. So Brian likes to throw in these words like we all just walk around reading hagiographic writings on a regular basis. But Yeah.
Well, you all learned a new word today. You're welcome.
Yeah.
Glad to help. That's what I'm here for.
And whatever. Jesus is a G, so it's fine. It's fine. OG.
Oh yeah.
OG, angel of death, the destroyer.
That's a whole different conversation. I'm not getting
Sure
back into
is.
that
That's
one
why I
right now.
brought it up. So speaking of a whole different conversation,
We've had that conversation.
we have a couple of minutes left, or we really don't. But tell us, Brian, why does Matthew 28? What's that got to do with anything?
Oh yeah. Okay. Well, you asked. We were talking about doing divine council worldview related passages, and that kind of seems like one that it's easy to. That's one of those passages that kind of explodes with meaning when you read it in light of the divine council worldview. It reads, it's after Jesus rose from the dead. Before he ascended, he had his disciples meet him in Galilee. It says the 11 disciples were there, but this is probably the episode that Paul mentions in the Creed in 1 Corinthians 15, where he says he appeared to the 500, because that's where most of his ministry was and where most of his followers would have been. And after he rose from the dead, he kept telling them, go ahead of me into Galilee. There you will. The angels told him, go ahead of him into Galilee. There you will see him. They didn't believe it. So Jesus himself appeared and asked them, why didn't you go to Galilee? So they went to Galilee because. So he says to them, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I've commanded you. And surely I am with you always to the very end of the age. Before I understood the divine council worldview, I always kind of wonder, like, well, why would that, like,
Are you focusing on the all authority in heaven and on earth? Is that the part you're focusing on?
Yes.
Okay.
Since God is already God, why would this be a big deal? But as we understand from Psalm 82, from Genesis 11, from Deuteronomy 32, 7 through 9, when they gathered at Babel to build the ziggurat to try to reinstate the arrangement of Genesis 6 from Mount Hermon, God disinherited the nations. He gave them over to the rule of the lesser gods whose favor they sought, those being the gods of the divine council, who turned corrupt, as we read in Psalm 82. And we see a divine council setting in Daniel 7, of which Matthew 28 is the fulfillment, where it gives Daniel's vision of the four beasts, those being representative of the four empires of Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and then Rome. And then the fourth beast was slain and destroyed while the others were allowed to live. And then he says, in my vision at night I looked, and there before me was one like a son of man coming in the clouds of heaven. He approached the Ancient of Days and was led into his presence. He was given authority, glory, and sovereign power. All peoples, nations, and men of every language worshipped him, and his kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and his dominion is one that will never pass away. That Jesus was essentially declaring that fulfilled. And in that vision in Daniel 7, this was a huge. It talks about how thrones were seated and books were opened. This is the divine council seated for judgment. So the Son of Man was led into the presence of God and given this authority over the nations in the presence of the divine council after the fourth beast was destroyed and the others were robbed of their authority, were not robbed of it, but they were stripped of their authority. But essentially, Matthew 28 just doesn't make the same amount of sense without that understanding of what Daniel 7 is what's going on there, which only makes sense according to the divine council worldview. But and you see a lot of the idea here completed when Paul talks about this in 1 Corinthians 15 in the context of the resurrection, about how he must rule until all of his enemies have been put under his feet. Those enemies being the spiritual forces of darkness in the heavenly realms who sit on the divine council. So anyway, I could go on and on and on about that. And but it's
no, I think that's a good point. And let me restate a couple of things, because just to make sure it covered when you kind of casually said, the divine council, Genesis 11, et cetera, just to make sure people understand, Genesis 11 is talking about the Tower of Babel.
Right.
And I think, I don't know that we've talked about that a handful of times here or not, but it's important. That's a key part of this, right? So you have to have the Genesis 6, you have to have the sons of God and the daughters of men and the Nephilim. But then you get, and you have to have Psalms 82, and where the divine council's introduced, which is funny because it's later in the Bible, but it's, the timeline's a little disconnected.
It's almost like the writers assume that this, like the general story is already known.
Right.
And you're getting kind of
correct.
Like highlights of it.
So when you look at Genesis 11, what's happening is everyone knows the Tower of Babel story, but just to be clear, what happens at the end of the Tower of Babel story is what's important, right? So I'm looking at right now, it's the King James version that I have up. I'm looking for the verse. I don't know where it is. Oh, that's not a good version. King James version doesn't explain it well, but it's and I'm not going to slow us down to dig through and find this, but it's 11 or wait, maybe it's not 11 when that's discussed. Does it come back?
You want me to just read the passage?
That might help. I'm looking at it, but it's not the part. It's not the verse that I'm looking for, because I'm looking for the language of the people were scattered to the number of the sons of God.
That's Deuteronomy 32.
Thank you. Okay.
7 through 9.
That's what I was missing. So that's the verse that I was looking for. That's important. So the Tower of Babel is talked about in 11, but then in Deuteronomy, the story is retold. And what happens is, it's what I just said. It says that when God scattered the nations, he scattered them to as many as the number of the sons of God. And what that's implying, and from a divine council worldview is really clear, is that he's distributing the nations to the watchers, or to the angels, right? For governance and leadership. And then that is specifically what Christ was referencing in Matthew 28 that Brian just read, right? So after the dispersion, then Psalms 82 occurs, where Yahweh, God, the creator, is basically chastising his people, the members of the council, and he's chastising them for poor leadership and judging unfairly and a whole lot of other things. And then as that continues through, that's what Jesus was making reference to, is that he was reclaiming all ownership of all of humanity through his appearance, existence, and what was to come with his well, actually it just happened with the resurrection.
Next week, if we're going to do another passage on the divine council worldview, I'll do Acts 2, because that parallels Genesis 11, and I'll kind of explain all that.
That works.
So
yeah,
unless you wanted to,
I mean, we could, if you want to tease it, or we can talk about it then. But one thing I wanted to throw out was I was watching an old clip of Dr. Heiser just earlier today, and somebody asked him about televangelists. It was about money and what was his view of how Christians should spend money. And he basically, and this had to be just before he passed. He looks like he's pretty ill. He's in his bed, but he says, look, he goes, I'm not telling you, Christians shouldn't make money, but they should be earning money with an eye towards spending it to the benefit of the kingdom. He goes, as far as televangelists, he goes, I think they should all just be locked in prison for life. It's a pretty good little quip, but it triggered in my head. I just watched it today, and then as we kind of talked just now, we touched on televangelism, so I thought that was apropos.
Yeah, it's I have opinions on that.
Of course you do. I mean, why wouldn't you? So I think with that, we'll just go ahead and wrap up. We've gone a while here, and I think we got through our topics. Maybe we got to the point, maybe we didn't. We'll see. We'll let you decide. Go ahead and drop a comment. Let us know if maybe the flow and the format of what we've been doing over the past few episodes, if that works for you. What I will say is that we are now more available than ever before. So we are now, as in addition to Spotify, we are on Amazon Music, we're on iHeartRadio, we are on Samsung Podcasts, we're on Podchaser. So just about all the places that you can find a podcast, we're there. So look us up, and if you prefer to listen to a podcast on a different channel than say Spotify, which we've been on, go ahead and do that now because we're available, and also on YouTube. So if you want to see the video, we'll be on YouTube, and you can reach us at Mount Hermeneutics at gmail.com. Mount Hermeneutics at gmail.com. And don't forget to send a picture and a bio and let me know if you think Brian's really smart and you want to go out with him. Yeah. Don't listen to Brian. I'm the one doing this.
Specifically for you in the Tulsa area.
Yes, specifically.
Now I'm gonna get now the terrorists know. Now the terrorists know where to find me.
Well, the terrorists have to know if the cute redheads are gonna know. That's
I mean,
you gotta give and take.
I think this bit has
it doesn't matter what you it doesn't matter what you think.
It's not a bit.
You're right. So and you're afraid of
girls, isn't he cute? Doesn't he look a little embarrassed?
Come on, knock it off. I hate you guys.